Good evening and welcome. This is a developing story that is sending shockwaves through Washington and far beyond it. Tonight, the leadership of the Department of Homeland Security is under intense scrutiny as calls for impeachment grow louder following a series of deeply troubling allegations involving immigration and customs enforcement. At the center of it all is DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, and a question that is now impossible to ignore. Who is held accountable when federal power goes this wrong? Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you do not miss any updates as this story continues to unfold.
I'm joined now by the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, Robert Garcia. Congressman, thanks for joining me.
Sure thing.
So we've seen a number of abuses play out as it relates to ICE. With Kristi Noem in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, what punishment, what consequences should she shoulder because she's in charge of this agency?
Well, she should be impeached. I mean, look, if Kristi Noem doesn't resign or removed from office, that impeachment procedure should start immediately. I'm one of the co-authors of the impeachment resolution that's now in front of the Congress. There's no question that she has gone above and beyond the crimes, what she's done to rip up our Constitution, due process for U.S. citizens, the way she's treating people, the way that she and her agents have now, of course, now are killing Americans and people on the streets of our country is not only shameful, every American should be so disturbed by the images they're seeing now. And to have her and others come out and say that everything that the agents are doing is correct, or somehow that we shouldn't believe what we're seeing, obviously we're all of us are outraged by it. And so she must be impeached, and those efforts are underway. And I know that Oversight, Judiciary, Homeland Security, those three committees are going to be very involved in that process.
Can you talk a little bit about the appetite among your Republican colleagues? Because obviously they're going to play a major role in this if, they have a majority in the House and they're in charge of all these committees.
Look, some of the Republicans are obviously starting to grow a little bit of a spine. You're starting to see some members of Congress actually ask for independent investigations, talk about the shooting as it relates to needing additional information. So look, there's something there. At the end of the day, I think most Republicans in Congress, they are committed. They bend the knee to Donald Trump, whatever he wants. But we have to push that. Their majority is so slim that we've got to push aggressively to get this impeachment moving. And hopefully, we just need a couple Republicans to join us.
We've seen Republican defections on issues that have become, 70-30 or 80-20 issues before. The Epstein file discharge petition happened because there was so much public pressure to the point where Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Nancy Mace, Thomas Massie all signed on to this effort. And ultimately, the law was passed out of the House and signed by Trump. Now we have another issue that's become a 70-30 issue with the way that ICE is abusing their position. 70% of Americans, again, do not approve of what we're seeing right now at the hands of ICE. And so does there still exist the possibility that if we saw this come up for a vote, that the pressure would be great enough on even these few Republicans who could defect and make a majority that we can actually see some movement on this issue?
I mean, look, we're going to find out. I think there could be. There are a lot of Republicans that are running for re-election, in some in districts that Kamala Harris won, many others that are trying to find their spine again and trying to do the right thing. And they're seeing Donald Trump and his complete erratic behavior. Donald Trump is losing his mind. I mean, he can't even put together coherent sentences. He can barely reach out to the American public and explain what he's trying to do on any given day. Right. And now he's going into American cities and turning ICE into his own police force. And so there's a lot of work ahead for us to do. The impeachment proceedings need to start immediately.
To what extent do you think, were you surprised to see organizations like the NRA, Gun Owners of America, former Bush officials who were in charge of standing up the Department of Homeland Security back in 2002, all of these people kind of coalescing into this one narrative that they are vehemently opposed to what the administration is saying right now, whether it's trying to vilify Alex Preddy for the crime of holding a gun for which he had a concealed carry permit and never even held because he was holding his phone, all the way up to just, again, to your exact point, these executions at the hands of these ICE agencies. What does it say that all of these even right-wing voices are coming out in opposition to this?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really great to actually see some of these right-wing groups come out. I mean, the fact that the NRA said anything,
yeah,
I think it's a really important step forward. But as important as some of these right-wing groups have been, a lot of these right-wing voices and leaders online, I've seen folks that have essentially always supported Trump, beginning now to say, hey, this is wrong. What ICE is doing is wrong. These are U.S. citizens. Why is ICE attacking folks this way? Why are we losing our civil liberties? The fact that DHS said that he had a gun, that has nothing to do with the fact that he wasn't using it. He's allowed to carry, people in this country are allowed to carry, and having a gun, that is not a reason to just murder someone because they are actually filming an incident, an ICE operation. And so I think a lot of folks right now are finally beginning to see the terror of this administration and the damage that Donald Trump is doing to this country. And so I hope those folks continue to be loud and continue to voice their opposition.
You know, in the aftermath of the 2024 election, there was a lot of talk about the damage that the Democratic brand had sustained. Cut to, we're now in January of 2026. Today, the gubernatorial candidate for the Republican Party in Minnesota dropped out because the brand of the GOP is so toxic that he didn't even think it was worth it to run as a Republican in that state. And so can I have your reaction to kind of that switch that we're seeing right now at the hands of a party that had, clear runway, everything going for them, to the point where just, a year later, they can't even run as Republicans in certain states because the what Trump has done to that brand is so egregious.
Well, absolutely. And let's look at the polling and the research. I mean, first, Trump is historically unpopular right now. He's never been this unpopular, not just with the American public, but with his own base.
Yeah.
The MAGA brand is underwater completely. Really, I'm seeing these numbers. And what's really interesting is he's not just doing poorly in traditional areas like healthcare or even on the Epstein files issue, but now on immigration. He's underwater on what used to be his signature issue, where the American public has turned on him on the one issue where he had a lot of strength. And so what you're also seeing is Republicans across the country trying to distance themselves. But more importantly, I think you're seeing energy on the Democratic side. We have a real shot, not just of winning the House, but winning the Senate. If we can somehow win the Senate, which will be very hard, there's no question about it. But if we can win the Senate and the House, we are on our way to then winning the presidency in 28 and once and for all putting MAGA away and as a horrific mark in our history, reversing all of the terror that Donald Trump has caused, and actually real agenda on day one that can be implemented with both houses of Congress. Because you're talking about Alaska, which is looking way better today than it did before. You're talking about states where Ohio is looking better than it did before. We're going to win states when we have to win states like Michigan, obviously, and New Hampshire. But look, there's an opportunity for us in places like Texas. Right. And so we need to play in every single state, including Maine. And there's an actual shot here. It's an outside chance, but a real chance of the Senate as well.
I'm glad you spoke about what we can do moving forward if we have majorities. I've spent a lot of time thinking about the ways in which Trump kind of feels emboldened and empowered to commit these criminal acts with impunity. And I think that was in large part due to the fact that there was no deterrent effect for him back in 2024. I mean, he tried to overturn a free and fair election. Merrick Garland didn't even touch him for 2 years. And only then did he deign to appoint a special counsel, but so much time had elapsed that he was able to effectively run out the clock. And so I understand the Democrats have to be focused on delivering, but I think that there's also a lot of real damage and danger in kind of advancing with an agenda where we don't look to hold anybody to account for any of the wrongdoing that they've committed, because then they feel emboldened to do it again. That's what we're seeing right now. It's playing out in real time. And so can you talk a little bit about the accountability that these folks have to shoulder so that in the event Republicans win at some point in the future, they don't proceed with the abject lawlessness that we're seeing right now because nothing bad ever happens to them at the hands of feckless Democrats?
That's where the Oversight Committee comes in. That's where a strong attorney general that the next president will hopefully be a Democrat will put in place. Look, I've said from day one that we cannot just move on. We cannot just pretend that this didn't happen. We can't just put together this forward-looking agenda and not actually then hold those that cause harm accountable. Because we need to be able to tell the next generation that this period of time was led by a corrupt administration, and an administration that harmed the American public that should never happen again. And so holding folks, not just Donald Trump himself and the family that is causing corruption across the world, but folks like Pam Bondi and Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem, these folks have to be held accountable. They have to be look at the American public and the courts and account for what they did. So that's why the investigations and subpoenas and holding folks in contempt and impeachment are going to be really critical in the months, and certainly when we have the majority.
Last point I want to touch on here is ICE salvageable?
No, you have to abolish ICE. There's no question. Look, this is not an agency that can be reformed. It's not an agency that we can somehow retrain. ICE needs to be abolished, and we need to begin to rebuild real federal law enforcement, which we had in this country before. Decades ago, there were functions that ICE performed that other agencies used to perform. And now we have essentially a paramilitary force that's only accountable to Donald Trump.
Right. We'll leave it there. Congressman, thanks so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm joined now by the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, Robert Garcia.
The House Oversight Committee,
Sure
Congressman Robert Garcia.
So we've seen a number of abuses play out
he argues
as
that
it
the
relates to
responsibility
ICE.
begins
With Kristi
and
Noem
ends
in
with
charge of the
Secretary
Department of
herself.
Homeland Security,
In his view,
what punishment,
Kristi
what
Noem has not merely
consequences
overseen
should
an
she
agency
shoulder because
accused
she's
of
in charge of
misconduct.
this agency?
She has actively presided over
Well, she
what
should
he
be impeached.
describes as a
I mean, look, if
systematic
Kristi Noem doesn't
breakdown of
resign,
constitutional protections.
or removed from
Garcia
office,
says
that
that if she
impeachment
does not
procedure should
resign,
start immediately.
impeachment
I'm
should
one of
begin
the
immediately.
co-authors
And
of
he
the
is not
impeachment
speaking
resolution that's now in
hypothetically.
front
He is one of the co-authors of an
Congress.
impeachment resolution already
There's no
introduced in
question
Congress.
that she
To
has
understand
gone
why this
above
matters,
and beyond
it helps to step back and look at the role of the
what she's done
Department
to
of
rip up our
Homeland Security.
Constitution, due
DHS
process
oversees
for
ICE,
U.S.
Customs
citizens, the
and
way
Border
she's treating
Protection,
people,
FEMA,
the
and other
way that she
agencies
and
that
her
wield
agents
enormous
now, of course,
authority
now
over
are
immigration
killing
enforcement,
Americans
surveillance,
and
and
people on the
domestic
streets
security. The
of our
Secretary is
country
not a symbolic
is
figure. She
not only
sets
shameful,
priorities,
it
approves
is-
policies,
every
and ultimately
American should be
answers for
so
the actions of the
disturbed
department.
by the images
When
they're seeing
allegations
now.
surface that
And to
agents
have
are
her
violating
and
due
others come out
process
and
or
say,
using lethal force
that
improperly,
everything that the
lawmakers
agents are doing
argue
is
that leadership
correct or
accountability
somehow
is not
that we shouldn't believe what
optional.
we're
It is
seeing.
fundamental to democratic
Obviously,
oversight.
we're
If this
all-
kind of analysis
all of
is
us are
helpful,
outraged
take a
by
moment
it,
to subscribe
and
so
she
you can
must
keep learning
be
with us.
impeached.
Garcia's
And
comments
those
go
efforts
further
are
than
underway.
standard political
And I know that
criticism.
Oversight,
He claims that actions
Judiciary,
taken under
Homeland
Noem's
Security,
leadership
those three
have
committees are
resulted
gonna
in
be very involved
American
in that
citizens
process.
being harmed
Can you
or
talk a little bit
killed,
about the
a charge
appetite
that
among
raises
your
the
Republican
stakes
colleagues? Because
dramatically.
obviously they're going
Whether
to play a
these
major role in
allegations
this
withstand
if
legal
they
scrutiny is
have
still
a
an
majority
open
in the
question,
House and they're
but
in charge of all
politically,
these
they are
committees.
already reshaping the
Look,
conversation.
some of the Republicans are
The
obviously starting to
congressman
grow a
points to
little
what
bit
he
of a
calls a
spine.
disturbing
You're starting
pattern.
to see some
Officials
members of Congress
dismissing
actually
video
ask for
evidence and
independent
public testimony
investigations,
is unreliable,
talk about the
asking
shooting,
Americans not to
as it
believe what they can
relates
see
to
with their own
needing,
eyes. That, he
additional
says, is
information.
what has ignited
So, look,
public
there's
outrage.
something there.
There is also a
At the end of the day, I
procedural
think
reality
most
viewers should
Republicans in
understand.
Congress,
Impeachment
they
does
are
not begin
committed.
on the
They bend
House
the knee
floor
to Donald Trump
overnight.
whenever he
It starts
wants.
in committees,
But we have
specifically
to push that
Oversight,
their majority
Judiciary,
is
and Homeland
so
Security.
slim
These committees
that we've
investigate,
gotta
subpoena
push
documents,
aggressively
and question
to get this
witnesses.
impeachment moving.
Only
And
after
hopefully,
that process
we
can
just
articles of
need a
impeachment be
couple
drafted and
Republicans
brought
to join
before
us.
the full House.
We've seen
Republicans currently
Republican
hold the majority,
defections
which
on
means any
issues that have
impeachment
become,
effort faces a
70-30
steep
or
political
80-20
climb.
issues
That is why
before
Garcia was
the
asked
Epstein
directly
file
about the
discharge
appetite
petition
among his
happened because there
Republican
was so much
colleagues.
public
Because
pressure
without
to the
bipartisan
point where
movement,
Marjorie Taylor
the
Greene,
process
Lauren
could
Boebert,
stall.
Nancy Mace,
For
Thomas
clear
Massey all
breakdowns
signed
like
on
this,
to this
remember to
effort, and
subscribe to the
ultimately
channel.
the
What
law
makes
was
this
passed
moment
out of the
different
House
from
and
past
signed
clashes
by
over
Trump.
immigration policy
Now we
is
have
the
another
framing.
issue that's become
This
a
is no longer
70-30
just about
issue
border
with
enforcement
the way
or
that ICE
political
is abusing their
ideology.
position.
It is about
70% of
limits,
Americans,
due
again, do not
process,
approve
and
of
whether
what we're
federal
seeing right now at
agencies
the
can
hands of
operate
ICE.
with
And so
lethal consequences
does there
and
still
minimal
exist the
accountability.
possibility that if we saw
Supporters
this
of
come up
Noem
for a
argue
vote,
that
that
agents
the
are
pressure
enforcing
would
the
be
law
great
under
enough
dangerous
on
conditions.
even these few
Critics counter that
Republicans
enforcing the law
who
does
could
not
defect
excuse
and make a
violating
majority
it.
that we can actually
As this
see
story
some movement
develops,
on this issue?
viewers should watch for
Look,
three
we're going
key
to find out.
things.
I think there
First,
could
whether
be,
Republican
there
committee
are a
chairs
lot of
allow
Republicans
investigations
that
to
are running for
proceed or
re-election
block them
in some
outright.
districts that
Second, whether
Kamala
new
Harris
evidence
won,
emerges that
many others that
substantiates
are
or
trying to
contradicts
find
claims of
their
wrongdoing.
spine again
And third,
and trying to do
whether
the right
public
thing.
pressure shifts
And
the
they're
political
seeing Donald
calculus
Trump and
in
his
Congress.
complete erratic
These
behavior.
factors will
Donald
determine
Trump
whether
is
impeachment
losing his
remains a
mind.
symbolic
I mean,
gesture
he
or
can't even
becomes a
put
real
together
threat. This is
coherent
not just a
sentences.
political fight in
He can
Washington.
barely
It is a debate debate about
reach out to
power,
the American public and
responsibility,
explain
and
what
the
he's
rights
trying
of
to do on
people
any
living in
given
this
day.
country.
And now
We
he's
will
going to
continue to
American
follow it
cities
closely and explain
turning
what it
ICE
means
into
in
his own
plain
police
language,
force. And so
not just repeat
there's a
sound bites.
lot of work
If you
ahead
value
for
that
us
kind
to
of
do.
reporting, subscribe
The
now
impeachment
and
proceedings
stay with
need
us
to
as we
start
keep breaking this
immediately.
down, step by
To what
step.
extent do you